My father called me a failure and kicked me out with nothing. Now he wants my help. I grew up in a small, struggling town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, where people married their high school sweethearts, worked blue-collar jobs until retirement, and never left. It was a town built on tradition, and no tradition ran deeper in my family than carpentry. My father, Gary, was a third-generation carpenter who ran a workshop that his father and grandfather had built themselves. This workshop was not just a business for him. It was his identity, his pride, his whole life. And in his mind, it was supposed to be mine too. But even as a kid, I knew I didn't belong there. My older brother, Josh, was everything my father could have asked for in a son. He was obedient, hardworking, and never questioned his place in the world. From the time he was old enough to hold a hammer, he was Dad's right-hand man. While other kids were out riding bikes or playing video games, Josh was in the workshop learning how to sand, cut, and build. By the time he hit high school, he had already memorized every type of wood, every tool, every technique. He took pride in the family business and never once complained about the long hours or the aching muscles. Dad adored him for it. Then there was me. I was the disappointment. Not because I was lazy, not because I was a troublemaker, but because I had dreams that didn't fit into his world. While Josh was out back learning how to stain wood, I was in my room sketching characters, landscapes, and designs. While my father spent hours teaching Josh how to build a perfect dovetail joint, I was spending hours on an old, beaten-up sketch pad practicing digital art tutorials I found online. I wanted to create, but not with wood. I wanted to design, but not furniture. I wanted to be a digital artist. But to my father, art was a joke. That's not real work. No one's going to pay you to draw cartoons. You think people waste money on that nonsense? Grow up. Every time I tried to show him my work, he would barely glance at it before shaking his head. That's not a skill. That's a hobby. Josh, of course, ate it up. Maybe if you spent less time doodling and more time actually working, Dad wouldn't have to ride you so hard. I stopped showing him my drawings after a while. Stopped talking about my dreams altogether. Because what was the point? By the time I turned 15, I knew one thing for sure. I was getting out of that town. I didn't care if I had to crawl my way out with nothing but $1 to my name. I was going to leave. I just needed a way to make money. That's when I discovered online commissions. At first, it was small stuff. $5 here, $10 there, drawing avatars, logos, or concept art for people. But over time, I got better. I started building a portfolio. I learned how to market myself. I joined forums, took every job I could get my hands on. I saved every penny, all while keeping a secret. I knew that if my father found out, he'd lose his mind. So I worked in the dead of night, after long shifts at the local diner. I hid my money in an old shoebox under my bed. And after almost a year of saving, I finally had enough to buy myself a slightly better laptop because it was no longer possible to work on mine, and I also bought a graphics tablet. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was one step closer to freedom. And then everything came crashing down. I should have known I wouldn't be able to keep it hidden forever. Maybe I was careless. Or maybe my father was just looking for something, anything to use against me. All I know is that I came home one night, exhausted from my shift at the diner, and found my room ransacked. My sketches? Torn to shreds. My laptop? Smashed on the floor. My savings? Gone. And in the middle of it all, standing with his arms crossed and a look of pure rage on his face, was my father. What the hell is this? I froze. You've been wasting time on this garbage? Instead of working? I clenched my fists. It's not garbage. Then what the hell is it? It's mine. I bought it. That only made him angrier. With what money? I knew what he was thinking. He thought I had stolen it. I worked for it. Doing what? Drawing cartoons for losers on the internet. That was it. I snapped. At least I'm making something of myself. Making what? A damn joke out of your family? I could feel years of resentment boiling over. I don't want your life, Dad. I don't want to be stuck in this workshop, breaking my back for nothing. His face turned red. Then get the hell out of my house. If you don't want to be part of this family, then leave. But don't come crawling back when you fail. I looked at Josh, expecting him to say something. He just stood there, arms crossed. Smug. Silent. I waited for my mother to step in. She didn't. I was on my own. So I left, with nothing but the clothes on my back, my shattered laptop, and exactly $312 in my pocket. The last words my father ever said to me? Good luck surviving without us. I didn't say a damn thing. I just walked out the door and never looked back. I stood on the front porch of my childhood home, staring into the darkened streets of the town I had spent my whole life wanting to escape. The air was thick with summer humidity, but I was shivering. I had no plan, no backup, no safety net. All I had was the clothes on my back, the $312 in my pocket, and a heart pounding so hard in my chest it felt like it might break through my ribs. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would chase after me. Josh, Mom, hell, even Dad. But the house stayed dark behind me. The door stayed shut. I had been cast out, and they weren't coming after me. So I walked. I had nowhere to stay. My first instinct was to go to my best friend Kyle's house, but his parents were strict as hell, and I knew showing up in the middle of the night with a backpack and a lost look on my face wasn't going to get me through the door. I ended up walking for miles, passing the same neon-lit diner I worked at, the gas station where the night shift guy gave me free sodas when I looked dead on my feet, and the liquor store where the town drunks gathered after dark. Eventually, I found myself at the town park. It wasn't much. A busted old playground, a few wooden benches, a field that was more dirt than grass. But it was empty, quiet. I sat down on one of the swings and just breathed. The reality of what had just happened started sinking in. I was homeless, and in the morning, I would have to figure out how to survive. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound, the wind rustling through the trees, the occasional car driving past, the distant bark of a dog, made my nerves spike. By the time the sun started rising, I was exhausted, starving, and still completely lost. But I didn't have the luxury of breaking down. The next few days were a blur of exhaustion, stress, and sheer survival. First thing I did, found a cheap motel and spent $50 on a night stay. Not because I wanted comfort, but because I needed a shower, a real bed, and a place to gather my thoughts. The next day, I knew I had to get a job. Fast. I went to my boss at the diner, begged for more hours, and he agreed to give me double shifts, one in the morning, one at night. That meant 14-hour days, flipping greasy burgers and washing dishes until my hands were cracked and sore. But I didn't care. I needed every cent. I was too proud to tell anyone what had happened. I just told people I had moved out early to start my own life. They believed it. Kind of. Kyle's mom kept giving me worried looks, but I played it cool. I crashed on couches when I could, spent nights in the park when I couldn't. And slowly, painfully slowly, I started to build something resembling stability. But I knew working at a diner wasn't going to get me out of this town. I needed to get back to my real passion, art. Every night, after working a double shift, I dragged myself to the 24-hour internet cafe on the other side of town. I spent the last of my savings on a used laptop from a pawn shop. Nothing fancy, just enough to get back to work. And then I hustled. I started small, logo designs, poster commissions for bands no one had heard of. Some nights, I made $10. Some nights, I made $50. Some nights, I made nothing at all. But I refused to stop, because every cent I made brought me closer to my escape. And after 2 years of pure, back-breaking hustle, I finally had enough. Enough to leave. Enough to get the hell out of that town and never look back. I was 19 when I finally got my ticket out. I had $5,000 in savings, a steady flow of art commissions, and a plan. One-way bus ticket, out of state. No destination in mind, just anywhere but here. I didn't tell anyone. Not Kyle. Not my coworkers. Not my family. I just left. As the bus rumbled out of town, I looked back one last time. At the roads I had walked countless times, at the diner where I had worked myself to the bone, at the town that had tried to break me. The next few years weren't easy. I rented a tiny apartment, nothing fancy. I kept grinding, kept improving my art. Slowly, my commissions turned into bigger projects. I studied everything: market trends, branding, digital techniques, client psychology. I treated every $5 gig like it was a $1,000 project. I never missed deadlines, never turned down an opportunity. And little by little, I started climbing. What used to be small-time commissions became regular clients. What used to be pocket change became real income. By the time I was 22, I wasn't just surviving, I was earning. I moved out of the shoebox apartment and into something bigger. A studio with my own workspace. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I upgraded my laptop, Got a professional tablet, a real desk, a proper chair. Clients started coming to me. Instead of chasing jobs, I was choosing them. And for the first time in my life, I had something my father always mocked me for believing in: financial stability. At 25, I was making more money than I ever thought possible. Not rich, not a millionaire, but more than enough to live comfortably. Enough to know that I would never need to beg anyone, especially not my family, for help. And as I sat in my own apartment, staring at the bank statements that proved I had built a life on my own terms, I realized something. I had beaten them. All those years they told me I was wasting my time. I had turned my hobby into a career. I wasn't a dreamer anymore. I was success. And now, after all these years, they were the ones calling me for help. The moment Josh's voice came through the phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: disgust wrapped in amusement. "It's Josh." For a split second, I didn't react. It had been over a decade since I last heard his voice. Not on holidays, not on birthdays, not even after I had built my life from nothing. Now suddenly he was calling me. "Listen, Dad's business is going under." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the view outside my window, a city skyline, a world away from the dust-covered shop I once thought I was destined to rot in. Josh kept talking, his voice tight, like he was chewing on broken glass. "We need your help. The same people who threw me out, who told me I was worthless, who called my dreams a joke. Now they needed me?" I didn't respond right away. I let him squirm in the silence. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, calm, controlled. "Oh, you need help." Josh exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath. "Yeah, Dad. He doesn't know I'm calling. But the bank is taking everything. He's losing the shop, the house, everything." My fingers tapped against my desk. An expensive, modern piece I had picked out myself. One that I paid for with my own money. Not because of Dad. Not because of family duty. Because I built something better than all of them combined. Josh hesitated. "Look, I know things weren't great between you and Dad, but this is different. He's got nowhere else to turn. Nowhere else to turn." That phrase stuck in my head like a splinter. For a long time, I had nowhere to turn. When I was kicked out with only $312, where was my family? When I was sleeping in parks, working myself to exhaustion, fighting for every damn dollar, where was my brother? Where was my father? The answer was simple. They weren't there. I agreed to meet them. Not because I felt bad. Not because I wanted to help. But because I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I wanted to see the large wooden workshop turn to dust. And when I arrived back in that run-down, miserable town, I almost didn't recognize it. It was smaller than I remembered. The buildings were older. The streets felt emptier. Or maybe I had just grown too much to fit into this place anymore. Josh was waiting for me outside the old workshop. It looked like hell. The guy who was once my father's perfect son, the golden boy. Now he just looked tired, stressed, and aging faster than he should be. When he saw me, his face twisted into something unreadable. Maybe guilt. Maybe resentment. "Didn't think you'd actually come," he muttered. I shrugged. "Didn't think you'd ever call me." He winced, but didn't argue. Instead, he motioned toward the shop. "You should see it for yourself." I followed him inside, and the moment I stepped through that doorway, it was like stepping into the past. But this time, I wasn't the helpless, scrawny teenager my father could push around. I was a man who had made it without them. And now, I was here to watch them fall. The workshop, I remember, was always rough around the edges, but it was once full of life, hard work, and incessant noise. Now, it was a corpse of what it used to be. The walls were peeling, the floors coated in dust, the tools rusting from lack of use. The shelves, once stacked with carefully crafted wood pieces, were now almost empty. Josh led me to the back, where a single, familiar figure was hunched over a work table. My father. He looked smaller than I remembered, weaker. For years, he had towered over me, a force of nature that controlled every aspect of my childhood. Now he looked defeated. He turned when he heard footsteps, his brow furrowing, and his eyes landed on me. And for the first time in my life, I saw genuine shock on my father's face. The way he said my name, like he wasn't sure I was real, made something deep inside me stir. Not pity, not anger, just cold, quiet satisfaction. "Told you I'd survive," I said. His lips pressed into a thin line. His jaw clenched. For a long time, we just stared at each other. Finally, he exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand down his tired face. Josh called you. Not a question, just a fact. Josh cleared his throat. Dad, we need him. I saw my father's shoulders tense, like the words physically hurt him. He was proud, too proud. Even now, when he was at his lowest, he hated the idea of asking me for anything. But he had no choice. The shop is failing, he finally admitted. The bank's taking the equipment, the property, the house. And what do you want from me? I asked, keeping my voice flat. Josh spoke up before my father could. We need money. Alone. From me. So let me get this straight, I said, tilting my head. You threw me out with nothing. You told me I'd never make it. And now, after all these years, after I built something on my own, you want my money? It's not like that. No, it is, I said. I reached into my wallet, pulled out $312, the exact amount I had when they cast me out. I placed it on the work table between us. Here, this is what I had when you told me to survive on my own. Now it's your turn. Josh's eyes widened. Come on, don't do this. My father just stared at the money, his face turning red. This isn't funny, he growled. No, I said, turning toward the door. It's fair. He stood up abruptly. You can't just abandon your family. I paused, looked over my shoulder. Why not? I asked. You did. Then I walked out. The last time I went out, I expected to feel anger, regret, some lingering pain in my chest. But I felt nothing. Just peace. I had spent years carrying the weight of my father's words, the resentment of being cast aside like I was worthless. Now I had nothing left to prove. I stepped onto the cracked sidewalk and inhaled deeply. The town smelled the same: sawdust, motor oil, stale coffee from the corner diner. But it didn't feel like my town anymore. I was a ghost here, walking through a past that no longer had any power over me. Behind me, the door to the shop slammed open. Josh stormed out, his face flushed red, his eyes filled with something between rage and desperation. That's it? That's all you have to say? I turned slowly, looked him in the eye. Yeah, that's it. He ran a hand through his hair. You're really gonna let this happen? I shrugged. It already happened. Years ago. You just weren't paying attention. Josh took a step forward, his fists clenched. For a second, I thought he might try something. I almost hoped he would, because the truth was, I wasn't the same kid they had thrown out into the streets. I had been beaten down, exhausted, drained, but I had rebuilt myself into something stronger than they ever imagined. He must have seen it in my face, because his shoulders slumped. Dad's gonna lose everything. I smirked. Good. Josh flinched like I had slapped him. You don't mean that. I did. Because maybe, just maybe, my father needed to know what it was like to start from nothing. To claw his way up without help. To feel small, powerless, and alone. The way I had for so many years. You think he's the victim here? I scoffed. He threw me away, Josh. He smashed my laptop, stole my savings, told me to get out and never come back. He made his choice. Now he gets to live with it. Josh looked away. I could see the battle happening in his head. He wanted to argue, to tell me that family was family, no matter what. But he knew. Deep down, he knew I was right. Then Josh said, he always said I was the better son. But you know what? He never respected me the way he respected you. That threw me off. Respected me? I scoffed. He hated me. No, Josai. He feared you. That caught me off guard. Bullshit. Josh looked me dead in the eye. You broke the cycle. You refused to be like him. You walked away. He never admitted it, but that scared the hell out of him. For the first time in years, I saw something real in my brother's face. Not arrogance, not blind loyalty to Dad, just exhaustion, regret, maybe even jealousy. But it didn't change anything. You had your chance to walk away too, I said. And you didn't. Josh swallowed hard. Yeah, I didn't. For a moment, neither of us spoke. And just like that, he turned and walked back into the shop. I watched the door close behind him, locking him back inside that dying world. And I knew this would be the last time I ever saw him. I didn't wait to hear from them again. I didn't unblock their numbers. I didn't check their emails. I simply erased them from my life. Because I knew how this would go. My father would never change. Even as his world crumbled around him, he would still find a way to make it someone else's fault. Maybe he'd blame Josh for not being strong enough to save the business. Maybe he'd blame me for turning my back on them. Maybe he'd blame the economy, the banks, the customers, anyone but himself. It didn't matter, because I was done. I had spent years carrying the weight of my family's expectations, their rejection, their judgment. But that weight was gone now, and I was never putting it back on. A week later, I was back in my city, back to my real life. I sat in my apartment, the one I paid for, with my money built on my own success. I turned on my high-end computer, my professional tablet, my tools of the trade. I had a list of clients waiting on me, companies, brands, people willing to pay for my skills. Skills my father once called a waste of time. I didn't just survive. I thrived. Without them. And they were drowning. But this time, they wouldn't have me to save them.